I'm now in a convenient position for once, not having, as having moderated the discussion now, not having to summarize on the spot what has been discussed. This time, this will be done by Yann Devos from EFSA, who has been carefully listening and also reflecting on the discussions, and who will be now brave enough to provide, and you please sit down here, because then you better see what Yann is going to present. So I give the floor to Yann for a brief ad hoc summary and concluding remarks with respect to the topics which we have been discussing here. And after that, we will conclude this session. So Yann, you have the floor.
Thank you, Helmut. Yeah, this is a very pleasant exercise. So I'm trying to summarize some of the key aspects that were mentioned this morning during the session. So I need to be warning you because this is just a summary of some of the key points. So it's not an exhaustive list. It's prepared in the heat of the action. So it's really on the spot, and also it's my interpretation. So I'm listening to the discussion, and it's my lens. So it might not be your lens. And it's important to note that the final outcome of this exercise and discussion will be published in a small article that will appear in a special issue in the EFSA journal, probably in the first quarter of 2016. So more information will follow, and chairs, the speakers, and rapporteurs will be involved in that activity. So I think that we all understood. So we wanted to tackle 3 big themes to advance the environmental risk assessment in terms of robustness and efficiency. So we wanted to talk about protection goals, data quality, and multiple stressors. Environmental risk assessment, I think we all know what it is. So it's a tool that helps us to assess any possible risk that the deployment of a GM plant or another regulated stressor might pose to the environment. And it's part of a broader risk analysis process. And when we talk about the protection goals, it's a point that is not always well acknowledged, but it's the key. It's the starting point of your risk assessment, because with that step you in fact define the context of your assessment. So the protection goals are in fact the first step of your environmental risk assessment. So they define the context of the assessment by defining which components of the environment are valued. And this is valued by society, but also it might be defined in legal text policies. The challenge is that what is defined there is too broad. So it's not something that you can use in your risk assessment. So you need to make it operational and translate it into something that is measurable and for use in the environmental risk assessment. And as indicated by Lorraine, protecting everything everywhere forever is not always feasible, tenable. So you need to delineate what it is you want to protect, where you want to protect, over what time frame, and also what type of impacts that you consider tolerable or not. The big challenge is that in an ideal world, these things should be set up front. So, because this defines the frame in which a risk assessor will be operating. So the risk managers and risk assessors should have discussed together what that frame. Because if you didn't define what it is you want to protect, then you might do the best science you want. The science will not discover what is harmful. So you need to define in advance what is bad and good. And once you have defined that, then the science can tell you what good and bad is. So there is an excellent paper on that by Alan Raybould. You should have a look at this. And what we also realized today is that these protection goals are not necessarily related to a single stressor. So it could be applicable to different stressors. So maybe we need to think about a generic approach and have these operational protection goals set for independently of the stressor you're looking at. We also heard that it's an important communication tool. So communication is needed between the risk assessor and manager, because setting your protection goals will involve normative considerations that cannot be set by a risk assessor only. So you need that dialogue. And that dialogue will also be key to understand and clarify the diverging positions. So you will better understand what other stakeholders means and want to protect, and why they want to protect and value something. So it increases transparency, and it also makes explicit the underlying values about where people stand. And as mentioned as well, it's a communication tool. So you will use a common language with the ecosystem service approach. So ecosystem approach was proposed as one of the means to do that translation from broad to operational protection goals. So we have seen from the EXA experience that it's a fit-for-purpose approach. We overall see that it might also be suitable and sufficiently conservative to protect your biodiversity. And we also see that it's helpful to identify the famous trade-offs. It's a widely accepted term or concept in the scientific community. We also see, as indicated by Lorraine, that policy is integrating this approach, and it also is compatible with socioeconomic analysis, so it has a lot of added value. One of the challenges that was also discussed during session is that the practical implementation of the ecosystem service might still be challenging. So the landscape elements and the landscape perspective is not an easy one to tackle. The other part, second theme, was more related to data quality. So we played with the relevance, the reliability. So relevance is more ensure that you generate useful data for the risk assessment, and for the reliability, that's more the topic of York. You really want to tackle the inherent quality and validity of the results. So when we talk about useful data, it's important to realize that ecological research might not necessarily generate useful data for your environmental risk assessment. It can, but it's not necessarily the case. So the context is different. That was well explained by Joe. And also the role of problem formulation is key, because the problem formulation will allow you to set the priorities and also identify where action is needed, where uncertainties might be, and where you need to, for which you need to generate new data to resolve the limitations of the assessment. So it will help to guide you in generating useful and informative data, and also in distinguish the need and the nice to know. In terms of reliability, it's clear that you need to test some risk hypotheses, and this should be done as rigorous and as objectively as possible, like in any other branch of science. So environmental risk assessment should do that. And York has explained us why it's so important to adhere to good recommendations and good practices. Because if you have a good quality study, it will minimize the probability of having erroneous or inconclusive results. So you will increase the confidence in the results. You will also add certainty to the conclusions drawn, and this will strengthen the robustness of your environmental risk assessment. So this is key. And it will also be a precondition for the data acceptance and also the exchange of data across jurisdictions. So it might ease the data transportability, for instance. And so it's an important recommendation that I extract from the discussions we had, is that you have to comply with defined quality standards and procedures. The challenge is that these procedures might not always be set very clearly. So maybe for EFSA it's a lesson to take. So we might be building on that and maybe think about quality appraisal criteria and be more transparent about that. It's maybe a lesson we have to take home. And then we have the challenge about the multiple stressors. So we see that some non-target organisms, because they forage, might be exposed to different types of stressors. Some of these stressors might be regulated, but others might not be regulated. And from an environmental viewpoint, it doesn't matter. I think if you want to preserve bees, you have to account for all these elements. The challenge is that from a methodological viewpoint, it's difficult to account for all these elements. But we see from Jeff's presentations that progress is being made. So there is ongoing methodological developments, which might help us to account for real-life conditions. So he talked about improved assays with better model species, modeling, weight of evidence. So there are ways that look bright for the future, but there is still a lot of work to be done. And then there were some other points raised during the panel discussions. I only reflect on those that are really related to on how to advance environmental risk assessment. So I think the point of the contextualization of the ERA is really a very important one. And I link the process versus product-based regulatory oversight discussion to that. Also, the selection of the comparator you use in your risk assessments will be related to the context. So you might consider different types of agriculture in your assessment. So it depends on which baseline you want to use, but this is again a protection goal. So it depends from one region to another. And then the discussion on the pre and post environmental risk assessment interplay is quite interesting. It's something we discussed a lot in our working groups. But so the aim is not to solve or resolve all the uncertainties in the pre-market environmental risk assessment. I mean, that's not possible. You don't have the tools to do that. So there will always be a residual uncertainty left that you could resolve later on in the process during the post-market environmental monitoring. So that's an interesting point, is to find this balance, and maybe we need to rediscuss this balance if we want to advance environmental risk assessment. The final slide, it's to thank all people involved in this exercise. So first of all, I wanted to thank truly the chairs, so Helmut and Jock. I think you both did that very gracefully, and like usual, I mean, I have seen Helmut in action before. Jock, it was the first time I met you, but you were wonderful as usual. The speakers, so we have Alan, Lorraine, Jeff, York, Joe, and Glenn. A big thank you for the very clear and helpful presentation. A special thanks go to Glenn, because he stepped in last minute to replace a speaker who couldn't make it because of health issues, so that's much appreciated. And also you, Alan, you stood here despite the fever, so that's much appreciated. Then we have the rapporteurs, so we have Agnès, Franz, and Renilde, that were also very supportive in all this exercise and in the preparatory work, so thank you for that. And then we have a lot of shadow workers that did a lot of work behind the screen, so you might have not met him, but we have Andrea Germini, Cynthia, Karin, Virginia, and they made it possible that everything took place here. And we also need to thank EFSA Hierarchy for having let us the freedom to organize a session like we wished. And then I wish to thank you for the active contribution. So no tweets, I understood, so that didn't work. But for the panel discussion, and also for your attention and to find your way to this session. So thank you very much. And I think Helmut will give a final word, and so you can rush to the lunch.
Okay, no, not much to add here, but Jock and I, first of all, would like to congratulate you, Yann, on this ad hoc and spontaneous summary. Excellent, very good, on the spot. A lot of information, and really admiring how to do that in such a short period of time. I mean, I'm sure EFSA will need that anyway, and you have already done a big part of the work, which you no doubt will have planned to do anyway in analyzing what this session has brought. But I would just like to echo in very few words what you have already said. On behalf and together with Jock, I would like to first of all thank EFSA and all the people who have been involved. I'm not repeating the names again from my side, but you have really done an excellent job in organizing this, putting all this together. For me, it was really an honor and a pleasure also to liaise with you and to prepare with you and Jock for this particular session. Thanks to the speakers for excellent contributions. Some of you really had to travel very far to get here. It's very much appreciated. I think we could bring the European perspective also in a broader context, which is always very important. Also very big words of thank you to you for your interest in this topic in this session, and for your active, very constructive and very concrete contributions. That's very much appreciated. That's exactly what we need in order to move forward. Finally, I would like to thank Jock for a nice collaboration to act here as co-chairs, Environment Agency Austria, European Environment Agency, together with European Food Safety Authority. I think that's quite a nice role model, which we should continue to play in the future. I enjoyed it very much. Jock, would you like to add something? Oh, taxi. Ooh. I would like to finish with a very, let's say, unconventional suggestion to you. The two co-chairs are, in fact, looking for anybody who would be interested to join us to go to Malpensa Airport this afternoon. As we have been speaking about cost-benefit analysis, during the coffee break, Jock and I were doing a small cost-benefit analysis. The price of a taxi is fixed, is 65 euros, and we were thinking that if more than two of us, meaning 3 or 4, are going, it would reduce the cost and increase the benefit for the two of us, but also for the others probably joining. Now I'm expecting a big rush, but first of 2:30 is the time when we are about to leave to Malpensa Airport. First come, first serve. Thank you very much.